You can all see that? Taking that as a yes. Great. Okay, so the business environment. So we've covered off the business model canvas and its plugin, the value proposition canvas. And they're very much focused on looking at the factors within a business that you can control. And so, you know, a lot of the things that are in there are all within your control. And you know, the decisions you take around some of that, based on obviously what the market is telling you or saying to you, will determine how whether you're going to be successful and how successful you're going to be. Um, Outside of the business model canvas, then is the business environment map, and this all forms part of the strategizer tool set. Uh, so one of the things that Alexander Osterwalder gets very animated about is he's often criticized because there isn't a column in the business model canvas for competitors. And this he's faced with this criticism quite regularly. And he makes a strong argument to say, well, no, the business model canvas is about all of the factors that you can control within your business to enable you to add value, create value for your business. Competitors sit outside of that because you have no control over what competitors do. So the competition piece sits outside of the business model canvas for that reason. So the focus here is understanding the four quadrants of the environment map and why context matters. It's sort of learning and instilling that there's a need to scan and understand and allow for the external forces that you have no control over. And you know, so evidence gathering, sense making, and all of the rest of it is very important. And you heard Leah talk to that yesterday. You know, where she has people that she contracts in to do some of that herself, but you know, and she'll do that even on the basis of a meeting to meeting basis where she met a new client just this week, and she had someone go off and do some digging and do some homework around that particular client and what you know what the issues they might have are, and that informed the meeting. So look, hopefully you leave with some templates and a cadence for ongoing monitoring should you decide to pursue your own idea. So as I said, the business model canvas sits there in the middle. That helps you create value for your business. The value proposition canvas is that plugin which helps you to gain a more granular understanding of the customer profile in the context of those customer job pains and gains that we talked about on Monday, and then the value map, those pain relievers and gain creators in the context of the product or service that is being developed. And then zooming out, you have this environment map, which helps you understand the context in which you're creating value, hopefully. So this is the value map, and there's essentially four quadrants to it. There's the key trends, there's market forces, there's macroeconomic forces, and there's industry forces. So this helps you to understand the context in which you're creating value, as I've indicated. And another important consideration here is that, again, as with all of these tools, it's not a tick box exercise. It's not something that you do once and then move on and don't think about or do or consider or scan for again. So all of these things, these industry forces, these driving trends, these market forces, these macroeconomic forces, they all change over time. So there's a need to continually scan and consider all of these over time, because ultimately you're going to have to take decisions within your business uh, because of these external influences. So that's worth bearing in mind. So what the map is and what it isn't. So it maps context around the business model, not the model itself. There's a focus on the forces you can't control, as I've indicated, how they help or perhaps hinder you, or could hinder you or provide a barrier. So it complements, not replaces, customer discovery and all of the other experiments, or some of the other experiments that we've talked about, obviously. But it's really orienting teams to think, that sort of outside in thinking before solutioning. And ultimately, yes, it's risk mitigation. It's, you're pulling together a strategy for your business. All of this has to inform the strategy. Very, very important. So businesses can win or fail on context. You can win or fail on whether, Google decides it's going to build something that, eats your lunch. Customers change over time. So it's very important to, be very much in lockstep with your customers and understand your customers and have a very good relationship with us and open communication with those customers. New segments will appear as needs and attitudes shift, and that's, some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about this morning. How, new opportunities arise on the back of things like, generative AI, for example, coming about, but also for certain types of businesses that can represent a threat. So, tech regulation, and regulation is a big one in terms of the external forces. And that can be a competitive advantage if you are developing something that's fully compliant, or enables your customers to be fully compliant with regulation. So that's another important one. Culture, different things that arise or different trends that arise within population bases over time. As I say, you can't control them, but treat it like the weather. You can't change it, but you can dress for it and you can plan for it. And that early warning lets you redesign and lets you react very, very quickly. The managing director of a large company in Ireland, sort of a meat processing company, cooked meat, called Dawn Farm. The day after the Brexit vote, he had his top team round the table, and the big focus was on brainstorming how they might reduce their reliance on the UK market. And, he recognized very quickly that, they needed to have a strategy, and they needed to reduce that reliance. Arguably, perhaps that could have happened or should have happened perhaps 6 months prior. And in fairness, I would say there probably was some discussions at that time, but the early warning, the earlier you react to a situation, the better you're prepared for it, to mitigate against any risk. Um, so look, some of this is just the same stuff. Things like housing costs in Ireland, weak wage growth in the UK. All of these things have impacts. Younger buyers may not have as much disposable income. So there's things that are happening all the time that you should have a healthy curiosity about. It's very, very important. So the key trends, just the four quadrants at a glance, and I'll take one of them at a time. The key trends, technology, regulation, cultural shift, societal norms, and how societal norms change over time. Market forces, that's the customer segment, the jobs, pains, and gains, the the channels to the market and the expectations of the market, etc. The macroeconomics, so the growth, the inflation rates, the labor market, FX, currency fluctuations, income distribution, etc. And then the industry forces, so the competition, the substitutes, the do nothing options, the new entrants, the supply chain, buyer power, all of that kind of stuff. So each quadrant here produces constraints, triggers, and options for business models, and ultimately present opportunities as well as threats. So the first one here is the key trends. So the technology waves that alter cost curves and user behavior. And we're seeing that now probably with the evolution of generative AI and the impact that is having on lots of business models. Consultancy, for example, it is believed is going to be hugely impacted by the evolution of generative AI. I know of large accountancy companies that decided to sell out because of the risk that they perceive that's coming down the track with generative AI and its impact on the accountancy sector. So you can see how there's a potential huge impact here, but there's a huge opportunity as well if you can stay on top of this. And there's a need for lots of different customer segments to stay on top of the new, well, certainly from a generative AI perspective, to stay on top of that and perhaps capitalize on your your deep knowledge of how to use these tools in a way that can help assist or accelerate your clients to do what they need to do. Regulation is a big one. So you have things like extended producer responsibility, for example, in packaging and in clothing, which is having a huge impact on the food packaging industry. Whereby there are financial penalties for putting non-sustainable packaging out into the marketplace. And similarly, for some of the large fast fashion organizations, putting something out into the marketplace and not having the capability to take that back is a threat. But also then once you take it back, what will you do with it? Does that represent a cost? Because there is regulation then coming in that will restrict you from, for example, shipping that abroad, as would have been the case heretofore. So look, regulation applies to lots and lots of different industries, agriculture, food, healthcare, and it's important to be on top of all of that. AI as well. For anyone with AI ideas, there is lots of AI regulation coming in around ethics, etc. And it's very, very important that you understand all of that and that that you're on top of it and are able to react to enable you to create opportunity for yourself and your idea. Data access, privacy norms, trust mechanisms, etc. I did a project going back a couple of years where there was a team that had developed algorithms that could pick up on mental health issues from input. So your messaging, your emails, your WhatsApps, etc. Wherever there was text being input, it could pick up on the early signs of a potential mental health issue from either a depression or an anxiety perspective. Fundamentally, there had to be buy-in from if this was to be deployed within a corporate setting or an employee setting, because obviously data access very, very important, permissions very, very important, trust mechanisms, very, very important. And that particular project was challenged a lot with the whole Big Brother perception of the technology. And there was resistance there in some quarters. And again, all of that has a big impact on potential opportunity for that type of technology. And standards, complying with standards, meeting the requirements of standards can give a competitive advantage and can unlock adoption as well. So heat trends is a very important consideration for lots of different idea types. And look, here's a simple one. Target. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the organization Target. Large US retailer, who obviously, there's a need for large organizations like that to stay on top of key trends. But simple key trends that it will be picking up on is healthy living, and how there's a massive push on healthy living from certain quarters and certain demographics. But similarly, is other demographics that have a huge issue and challenge with obesity, and they all represent customer segments for these organizations. Genetically modified foods, so these are societal and cultural trends. There are regulatory trends for organizations like this, such as the FDA in the US, local health departments, taxes, fair work laws, antitrust laws, etc. So, these trends all have an impact on this business. And similarly with the general sort of socioeconomic situation, price, sensitivity, places where there are poverty. Different organizations have different business models, obviously, in this particular segment. So, there's large retailers like Waitrose in the UK that will have, huge stores in places like Kingston upon Thames, very wealthy area, premium products on the shelves, etc., etc. Whereas other organizations like Lidl or Aldi might target areas that aren't as wealthy, and their price points are calibrated accordingly. So it's very important to be on top of all of this type of information. Market forces. So market forces, segments evolve as needs and attitudes change over time. Willingness to pay is an important consideration, and the price that the market will bear is an important consideration in the context of the value that you're providing. So a lot of this comes back to the jobs to be done. What are customers trying to achieve? What are the pains that they're experiencing? And what are the gains that they're looking for? Et cetera, et cetera. So these are again, to hark back to what we spoke about on Monday and Tuesday. And the earlier activity will feed into this from an external perspective also. And early adopter characteristics that predict your next beachhead. So your beachhead is your primary market, if you like, from a early evolution perspective. But you will expand from there, if you like, and move into other segments. So an early adopter characteristic can predict the next beachhead. And again, for market forces for this company Target, so healthy eating is a market issue. Obesity again is a market force. Green and environmentally friendly product, that can be a market force from a consumer perspective, whereby it's the consumer that's driving the demand for that. Similarly, it can be a market force from a regulation perspective. the market segments. You might be considering, well, who is my market here? Who is my ideal customer? Is it middle class mothers in their 30s and 40s? Is it the highly educated? Is it those with average to high income? Is it perhaps those with low income? And the switching costs, for example. So that whole convenience, national brands. How can we lock in customers? How can we hold on to customers? A good way of doing that is ensuring that there is a switching cost to leaving you. And banks to some degree would try and take advantage of this kind of thinking. Ease of switching to competition. So it can be both an opportunity and a threat, where organizations make it easy to switch to them. The macroeconomic forces. So the financial health of society affects customers' willingness to pay. Growth and confidence, obviously. I mean, right now, there's there's a mix. There's a cost of living crisis on one hand for certain demographics, and there's full employment on another hand in some countries like Ireland, whereby there are some aspects of our population that have lots of disposable income. Inflation and input volatility obviously compresses margins when mortgage interest rates go up. There's an impact when house prices go up, and you're forking out large deposits for property and paying off a big mortgage. That has an impact on the amount of money in the pocket as well. Labor markets, talent scarcity, rising wages on the back of that, and wage pressure, all has an impact. Customers change over time, partly because their needs change, and partly because their attitudes change. So again, it's useful to tune into all of this and have a good understanding of all of this. Just some simple examples here, stuff that perhaps you mightn't have seen even 5 years ago. There's a company in Ireland called Manadrone, that's very much focused on using drones to deliver for home delivery. So something as simple as a coffee is part of their mix. Carry out foods is a big part of their mix. I believe there's also going to be a focus for them on medicines, and indeed on things like organ transfer from hospital to hospital, that kind of thing as well. So you can see how drones have the potential to disrupt a lot of existing business models, where there are a lot of companies that are perhaps looking to see how they might utilize them to stay ahead of the posse. These sticks for taking selfie sticks. Again, something that 10 years ago, or even maybe slightly longer, 15 years ago, wasn't on the horizon whatsoever. But with the evolution of selfies, an opportunity was presented, and I dare say there's a few companies out there that are doing quite well out of that. Gluten-free, gluten sensitivities, and all the rest of it is another trend which is in full tilt presently. So these are companies that the macroeconomic. So look, this is the target one again. I'll not go through all of this. You can have a look at the slides in your own time. Another way of considering the external environment is SWOT. So I dare say some of you have heard of what's called a SWOT analysis. Strengths, weaknesses, external opportunities, and threats. It's a tool. It's essentially a 2x2 whereby you list out each of these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to guide decision making and formulate strategies to enhance overall performance. The strengths and weaknesses aspect are internal, and then the opportunities and the threats are the external aspects of this. But again, it's about helping you to capitalize on those strengths, address the weaknesses, seize opportunities, and mitigate against the threats. So again, it's the external factors that organizations can capitalize on to gain a competitive edge or competitive advantage. Simple one here on a polymer or plastic recycling. Actually, in this case, I think it's clothing recycling, turning polyester back into its raw ingredients that can be utilized then to create a new virgin quality material. It's a technological university of the Shannon technology. So you can see here, just looking at the external environment for this particular technology. So an opportunity is the fact that there's a big focus on recycling and circular economy globally, including Europe at government level. And there's lots and lots of legislation that's focused on trying to reduce the use of fossil-based materials. So imposing extended producer responsibility, I mentioned earlier, and the stricter obligations for the take back and recycling of post-consumer materials. In this case, textiles. It also applies to packaging. And then there's the ready availability of post-consumer clothing. So, there's an opportunity there in that we all wear clothes, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And there is a need to dispose of that clothes. So it presents an opportunity for new business models to arise. There's a huge demand for recycle it from underutilized waste streams. So again, that's an opportunity. Public-private partnerships and developing supply chains and infrastructure, etc. And fiber-to-fiber recycling at scale is much needed. For the likes of PET bottles that people are drinking out of, there's an easy recycling route there. It's bottle to bottle. It's mechanical. It's essentially chopped up and put through a process again. But for certain types of materials, it's not that easy to recycle. So there's a huge opportunity for any organization that can come up with a way of doing it and doing it effectively. What we've determined in this particular project is that it may not require huge volumes to be cost effective, depending on the process and how you're set up. Similarly with the threat, so strength of intellectual property and the potential for infringement is a threat. There's a lot of people looking at this. Many technologies are at a more advanced stage. That's not to say that they're better technologies. They may not be. But there's a huge focus on this particular area. And lots of organizations around the world, Carbios in France, Eastman in the US have spent millions, if not tens of millions, and perhaps in the case of Eastman, hundreds of millions, developing their technology, yet still hasn't been commercialized as yet. And there's progress on complementary aspects to it, such as textile separation technology, taking the zips out, taking the buttons off, and any other materials that might be in the mix there. There's, in some cases, there's a need to separate those out before you can recycle the polyester. And some of this other stuff can also represent a threat, depending on your business, depending on your business model. So there's a need to understand all of that and use that information then to inform how you progress. With new technologies, there's a rising demand for the waste textiles, and that rising demand then has the potential to increase the cost of that. I know I did a project that looked at using what we'll call fish waste from seafood processing companies to create bioplastics or biofilms. And there was a natural assumption that fish waste has zero value. But when I went out and did the customer discovery, I determined that, or was able to find out, had it communicated to me that fish waste actually has a value. And in some cases, it's quite a high value, depending on the nature of the product. So there are parts of the fish that can be used and consumed. Obviously, there are then a hierarchy of the bits that generally aren't used in terms of fillets, etc. But some of these can go off and be used for other applications, health food supplements, etc. And that can have quite a significant value, 300-400 euros a ton. And even the lower value materials that are coming off the fish processing plant can be 50 to 100 euros a ton. So that assumption that it's zero value was incorrect, and that had a knock-on effect on the opportunity in terms of how much it would cost to produce this biofilm material. So look, you can see the value here for any new idea in looking at the opportunities that might be relevant to your idea and looking at the threats and really digging into all of those to see how it might inform what you do next. And the industry forces. So for industry forces, competition, I'm going to focus on here. So it's important that we map direct competitors if they exist and the near substitutes. Because you'll often hear it said. I've heard it said many times, and many investors hear this too in pitches. We don't have competition, and there's nearly always competition. It's very important that you have a think about what your competition is, and the competition may not be another solution that's on the market. The competition might be the do nothing option, or the workaround option, or the near substitute option. So it's worth you in your research looking at all of those and mapping all of those. And as part of that, then, look at the barriers to entry. You're developing something and determining are there barriers to entry that you can, that are out there from an external perspective that perhaps you can use to your advantage. Are there learning curve advantages that you can capitalize on? So look, it's quite important that you really focus on all of that. I would do commercial feasibilities, and I will try to list out as many competing technologies as I can, and understand those competing technologies. So I'll, describe them in some detail, with in the context of what they are, what they do, what their value proposition might be, what their what their market, how much of the market have they captured, who examples of their customers. I might try and find out pricing information, if I can. Sometimes that you can do that. Not all organizations, in fact, quite a number of organizations won't make that available. But there are ways and means of finding that information out when you go digging. So these are important things to do, and also doing a compare and contrast between what they have developed and what you're proposing, and to see are there gaps or are there ways in which you can differentiate your offering, and you create an unfair advantage where rivals cannot easily follow. So look, I'm not. This obviously isn't something that I put on a slide for you to read. But you can see here just an example whereby this is a competing technology for a project that I was working on, a company called Bravely. So I've articulated what the company is. I've articulated their core offerings. I've tried to provide some kind of a positioning versus the pick that I was working on. And I've given an example here of the mobile interface, the app interface for this competing solution as well. And again, you can see here there's about 12 pages. There's more actually. I think I only screen grab what I could screen grab without making it look ridiculous, and this probably does look ridiculous. But again, it's not to show you, the detail. It's just to show you that you can really spend time, a lot of time, trying to understand all of the competing technologies, list them out, look at their features, try and do the compare and contrast, look at some of their screen interfaces. Down here on the bottom right, this is a feature comparison matrix. So within this, what I'm trying to do is something like this. This isn't the exact one from the previous page, obviously, but what I'm trying to do is something like this. I'm looking at the technology in question, and I'm looking at the others, and I'm trying to see, well, okay, what are the features that they have, and trying to understand, are there opportunities? Is there something unique about what I'm doing, where there's a strong value proposition that the others perhaps don't have? And this is very useful for funders, and it's very useful for investors, whereby if I have a long line of tech where I have lots of interesting features that have or all have a value proposition, and I'm ticking all of these boxes, and there's gap across the alternatives, and the alternatives might be direct competing solutions, or they might be just other workaround methods, or do nothing methods. So this is, an interesting way of framing it, and it's very visual, and it's the sort of methodology that you can just look at very, very quickly, and understand and get very, very quickly. And it can be very powerful on a slide deck. Another way of doing this is mapping your competitors using a 4-quadrant model. So essentially looking at things that are important to customers, things are maybe not so important to customers, and mapping all of those in a 2x2 to try and demonstrate your differentiation. So you can use the XY axis the XY axis to show where you differentiate. So, for example, here with the Airbnb, online traction and affordable, as opposed to offline traction and expensive. Where you can use something like this just to say, well, this is the quadrant we're in, and it allows a project to quickly identify that white space that's your unfair advantage, if you like, and in this particular case, the aim and the focus is to be in that top right-hand quadrant. So look, just from a competing solutions perspective, it's very important that you demonstrate a diligent awareness of both your direct competitors and your indirect substitutes. and that proves that you're grounded in some sort of market reality. It'll allow you to demonstrate those sustainable competitive advantages, or at least your competitive advantages. But the more intimate knowledge you have of all of this, it allows you to make your best efforts to be sustainable, and to prolong that opportunity that you might have. It allows you to maintain barriers to entry, continual engagement with the external environment as well as your own customers allows you to ensure that there's always a gap between what you're doing and what the competition might be trying to do. And if there's a buck to be made, then you will have competition. That's just the laws of business. And the challenge for any innovator is to ensure that you're always maintaining a gap. And the best way to maintain that gap is a deep understanding of the customer jobs, pains, and gains, a continuing dialogue with your customers, and intimate knowledge of the external environment, so that you can, understand the trends, pick up on the early emerging trends, and capitalize on those, as well as being prepared for anything that might represent a risk. And so investors, like if you're going along and you're looking for pre-seed funding or seed funding from investors, or proof of concept funding from grant providers or investors, they'll want to know that you've thoroughly analyzed the market environment and that you have that sustainable edge. So it's an important consideration. As I said, lots of investors hear this, we have no competition. And saying that, it really does signal naivety about your market. Even disruptive innovations compete with established behaviors or workarounds. That's just a fact of life. Simple example here. I think I already mentioned this particular project. I mentioned these because they're just recent. So an AI-powered behavioral support platform that helps leaders make confident, clear decisions under pressure and in the face of uncertainty. And so I've identified direct competitors, and I've obviously provided, this is just a bullet points listing them, but I've provided a lot of detail on these and a lot more for this particular solution and what they do. But I've also looked at the do nothing options and how they're currently trying to address the problem in the absence of an effective solution. And you can see here a do nothing option is relying on traditional executive coaching, obviously. But that's high cost sessions and it lacks immediacy. You can't, it doesn't support you in the moment of need. There's generic leadership training, but again, that doesn't support live decision making. And there's a value proposition for the project I was working on around the in the moment support. There's the ad hoc peer mentor support, etc. That informal reliance on colleagues or senior leaders for guidance, which obviously has massive limitations. And there's the status quo. There's no intervention. There's leaders just, continuing under stress, not taking the decisions that need to be taken. There's hesitation, and there's consequences to all of that. Over consensus. One of the large UK building societies said to me that they were paralyzed by inability to take decisions and by the need for consensus in taking decisions. So it was decision making by committee, which just slowed everything down. And there were lots of people within the organization getting paid to take those decisions on an individual level. So important to think about your direct competitors and perhaps list those out and understand who they are. And it's also important to consider the do nothing options, and what the consequence of those do nothing options are, because they will help you define your value proposition as well. And the do nothing options are, well, what's currently happening from a do nothing perspective. Maybe ask you to have a go at, for those of you that have ideas, or if you want to just take a random idea that may not be your own, for a solution or an idea, or an early stage project that you're aware of, or indeed something that might relate to your own research area. If I could ask you just to have a think about, well, who are my direct competitors? And what is the do nothing option for my idea, or for this idea? So if I could ask you to take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to have a go at that. Is there any questions? There's a thumbs up there from Barry.
Hi, Karen. I have a question, if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah,
Barry.
I'm struggling to get my head around the do nothing parts. My understanding is, right, I know what I want to offer, and I'm looking at competitors who are offering similar, uh, in relation to the patient or the people, the pains for the customers. And then the do nothing is that where I'm looking for,
you,
yeah.
you, 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 you're either looking at a workaround, so what the current workaround is. So if there's a problem that exists presently, are there workarounds? Is there stuff that they're doing that's, suboptimal? Not perhaps not addressing the problem as effectively as what you're proposing, but that's what they do now. And the
Okay.
question is, will they switch? Is
So,
there sufficient motivation for them to switch to what you're proposing? So it's just having a good sense of, what is the workaround, or what is the do nothing option, because they may or may not be motivated to move from the workaround.
right. And then
That
you're
makes sense.
looking to expose if the current option for that customer is something that's not, or they're not quite reaching the needs of the customer, or
I
and
mean, it's ultimately the workaround is a competitive offering.
yeah,
If they're currently using it, it's a competitive offering that you need to know and understand. If in this particular case, that traditional executive coaching is the workaround, it's knowing what that is, understanding its limitations, understanding uh, it, the cost factors, perhaps understanding
okay,
why that's not, if it's not scalable, for example, why it's not scalable. Good coaches are hard to come by, they're expensive, etc., etc. So it's understanding all of that.
right, right,
And these are workarounds. These are things that that people or organizations are trialing, or trying, or perhaps are utilizing, or perhaps have utilized for many years. Like, for example, e-learning modules. It's generic. It's not tailored to the individual. It doesn't support the immediacy of the current requirement for immediacy, supporting that in the moment aspect. But it's just having a good understanding of, well, how are people, how is the world currently, or how is my potential customers currently addressing this problem? Or are they not? Is there just a status quo? Is there no intervention? So it could be the case that just no intervention, and they're suffering the problem, and they're not doing anything as a workaround, or they may be doing some kind of a workaround. They may have, some way of trying to address the problem, but it has limitations. So that's all a competing offering that you'd want to understand, Barry.
Perfect.
Okay,
Thanks,
Kieran.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
Kieran. So in my situation that I was talking about, this IP address thing, the last one you just hit on there, status code and no intervention, is the biggest challenge we're dealing with. In other words, the not wanting to change, the ultimate, what we have we think is doing okay for us, the resistance to change, so that do nothing option is, like, say, the greatest challenge we have in trying to convince that they should. I suppose, like, is that something you focus on? I suppose
It's
in
it's
how
it's a
you.
it's a difficult position to be in, whereby an organization doesn't recognize that it has a problem.
Hmm.
If that organization is saying no, we don't have a problem, then your next question is, well, why do you believe you don't have a problem? And let them articulate that. And you can either agree or disagree with it, obviously. And you can have a discussion around it to say, well, I think that the potential problem that you might have is X. What do you think? And just let them expand on that. And in fairness, they might have a valid reason why they don't believe they have a problem. You may not agree with it, but ultimately, if they're articulating that they don't have a problem and they're giving you a logic and a rationale for that, it's a very hard sell in after that point. But ultimately, if you ask the open question, so what are you doing now in the context of X? We're not doing anything. And are there any problems that you foresee, any pains, any issues as a result of the no intervention or the status? Yeah, sorry, Brian.
So maybe sorry, who was that was talking?
Ian.
Ian. I guess what he's trying to figure out is through his customer discovery then is to find out what the person's pain is and then be able to use the pain through those conversations in order to show them, well, actually, you just said that you're struggling with these numbers, and I can't remember what Ian's thing was. I know it was something to do with the internet, but
Yeah.
currently you're working at you're using the internet, and maybe it's slower, or it's costing you this amount of money, and then eventually you can show that by switching, you can save this amount of money. I know that's a very basic way of explaining it, but is that what you're trying to find out uh, from this kind of parts, if that makes sense?
I
Yeah,
think
but
with Ian's, there's probably a future proofing aspect. And that future proofing aspect, no doubt, comes with a value proposition. The question for Ian is, do the potential customers fully understand the future proofing aspect, and do they place value in it? And if they understand it and place no value in it, that's a very difficult place to be for someone coming along with a solution. If they understand it and do place value in it, but they're hesitating for reasons, you need to understand what those reasons are.
So you're looking for the hesitation. You're looking for that kind of they're aware.
Well, you're looking for the complete picture, and it's only through going in there and asking the open questions, spending the first 2/3 of your conversation understanding their perception of the customer jobs, pains, and gains, what they're trying to achieve, what pains they're experiencing, what gains they're looking for. It's only when you've gone through that, you've exhausted the questions, the open questions around all of that, that you would then, at the end of that, overview a high-level solution with your value proposition assumptions and seek a reaction to that. So and you certainly wouldn't lead the conversation or begin the conversation with trying to convince them that you have a value proposition without fully understanding their view of the world first. That makes sense, Ian?
Yeah, no, that's excellent, Kieran. It's I probably needed to hear that. As into not trying to convince them what's right and wrong, to get them, as you said, to explain what shortcomings or whatever that, and then see how it fits into that. And to be fair, we've tried to be positive rather than being condescending and actually telling them that they have to.
Be very curious around
Mhm.
their view of the world. You might be passionate about what you have. You might be passionate about the solution or the know-how that you have. You might be passionate about the fact that there really is value here. You need to understand what this value is, and I get that. I see that and come across that quite regularly. But that passion you need to spend, and you need to listen for the first two-thirds, three-quarters of the conversation. You then tell it as it is, with no passion in terms of your high-level description of what you believe to be your value proposition, and you seek a reaction to that. And you can certainly ask a few what-if questions, etc. But ultimately, if they don't see value after that, then it's a hard sell. It really is, and you're going to have lots and lots of conversations to convert a very, very low number of customers if they're all of that mindset. But similarly, if having high level overviewed your solution, they're saying, well, actually, that's a good point for X, Y, and Z reason. You want to gather up as much of that information as possible as well, because that could inform the next conversation you have with the next potential customer in customer discovery mode.
No, that's great. Thanks for that. That's very helpful.
Brilliant. Ian, does anyone want to share any input from their attempts to identify direct competitors or do nothing options?
Kieran, if I can come in there, yeah, please.
John,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So yes, I have identified my let's say my three competitors in the environmental education field. And well, I was kind of thinking of not a do nothing option, but I have an idea to step ahead. But then I feel that my competitors will probably maybe do the same strategy that I use. For example, transport costs are a big issue for visitors. So if I have this idea, come up with this idea that maybe if I can get a local business to sponsor the trip, the bus tour to the center, that maybe I can make it very attractive for the schools or the visitors. But then there's a chance that my competitors may follow the same thing and try to do the same thing. But I'm just sharing that story with you.
Yeah. Look, I mean, where you have an easy or you have a low barrier to entry, where something is easy to do, easy to follow, easy to copy, then there's a couple of considerations there. One is that first mover advantage, just doing something, getting a name, building a brand, and capturing as much market share as you can as early on as you can, and being known for being an innovative solution provider in your particular domain. And then you have a higher potential, shall we say, of being the go-to for that particular offering. So that's one way of looking at it and doing it. Obviously, there's nothing to stop competitors copying. And that's what I said earlier. There is a need then to continue to innovate. So you don't stand still. They might copy, and they will copy if there's a buck to be made. As I said to you, I have a client that operates in they manufacture large sort of elevators for aggregate, the big massive elevators that you'll see loading ships at ports, where you dump in a load of stones or some other form of aggregate, sand, etc., and it takes it right up, a couple of 100 feet in some cases, and loads a ship, etc. But their salespeople are tasked with going out there on a monthly basis and understanding what are the problems, what are the challenges, what are the limitations with our product, and what are the things that you would love to see if you had a magic wand built in. And they then spend a full day every month back at base brainstorming. How can we improve this solution of ours, these solutions of ours? How can we incorporate some of the features that our customers are saying they would love with those magic wand? And their focus on the market leaders is to continue to innovate and improve and iterate their products in a positive way, because their competitors are always chasing them. Their competitors are always copying them. The competitors are always doing what they do, but their focus is on appreciating that's going to be the case, but maintain a gap, maintain a buffer, always stay ahead of them. And if there are things that they can incorporate that would allow them to, for example, protect the intellectual property, which could be a barrier for some of these competitors, then great, they'll certainly look at doing something like that if it's worthwhile. If the potential upside of capitalizing on that particular invention makes it worthwhile, then they'll do that. If it's not, if it's a small iterative improvement, and where there isn't a business case for patenting it, then they won't, obviously. So these are important considerations for sure, Sean.
Yes, and I'm sure I can do the copying too of somebody else as well. You know what I mean?
It's a fair point, absolutely. But it's a nice place to be, where you're known as the innovator,
Perfect.
where you're known as leading the market, where you are the one that they all want to copy. That's a good place to be.
Very good.
Thanks, Sean. Anyone else want to volunteer the output of that short exercise? All very shy.
I'm happy to share if no one else wants to.
Yeah, Barry, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, so my competitors will be First Beat, Lua in Galway, and MTech Labs. So they offer kind of stress monitoring devices to predict and prevent stress and prevent burnout in the workspace. My do nothings will be if they didn't make any changes, they would just rely on self-reporting, where the employees are expected to just report if they're stressed to their HR manager. General wellness apps like Calm, Headspace, things like that, or else they just ignore their issues. And I guess then what I'm supposed to do is say what I'm offering then.
Oh, in a conversation, customer discovery conversation, yeah, I mean, it's understanding the customer jobs, pains and gains. Like, and I think I've said to you before, Barry, I've done a little bit of work in this space.
You have, yeah.
And I have spoken to companies like AT&T in the US, some of the large call centers like Concentric, so I've well, I can recollect some of the conversations I had for sure. And your focus, Barry, remind me again, is identification, or are you also focused on treatment?
Offering solutions, yeah, treatments as well.
Treatment. Okay.
I
So
was
you can
quite
do the
focused. I was quite focused on the visual analysis tool for video calls, as a means to predict and prevent stress. But I've kind of since then I've kind of opened my mind up again and looking at other options.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So you're right. The self-diagnosing, and that's a big challenge because generally speaking, most employees aren't psychologists, so they know that there's a mental load there, but they don't necessarily know what it is, or is it actually a problem? Like, is it depression or anxiety, or is it burnout, or they just don't know. There's no way of them knowing that, so they'll just take the time off, or they'll leave their job or whatever, and that's the problem for the employer then, obviously.
What I found through my customer discovery actually is really interesting. One particular interview with a wellness manager at a local tech company said that although they pump millions and billions into wellness, and they're, he went through his presentation with me, or his website with me, where they covered every aspect of wellness. People still weren't taking, they were paying for these apps, people weren't using them. They're providing time and space for people to take advantage of the wellness offerings, but the one obstacle they were finding was guilt. This is the biggest one that's kind of stuck with me since then. So people still
Yeah.
feel guilty about taking that time off. So
Yeah.
I think, and there's a few other things that kind of came to my attention, that I'm maybe going to refocus on,
Yeah.
um, for my solution.
So yeah, Um, very interesting indeed. It's an area that's getting a lot of focus. I mean, like I said to you, I spoke to one of the founders of Headspace during the exercise that I did with Lua, actually,
Right, right.
in Galway. Yeah, some fascinating conversations in that zone. And you're right, there's for all of the money that's being spent on them, there's an appreciation that quite a number of them just aren't working.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
EAP, for example, is not being taken up, but there's a big question mark around whether it works or not.
yeah.
Brilliant, that's great, Barry. Thank you. And
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, look, there's lots of competing solutions in that space for sure. I think what we tried to do with Lua was not we weren't it wasn't a treatment. It was an identification and then a point to the existing supports that were in place, as opposed to saying that we can treat the problem.
Kind of like neurofeedback, let people see the
Well,
numbers.
kind of like like the analogy that was used was the warning light on your dashboard.
Yeah, yeah,
So we have a warning light, and we're giving you an indication of what the problem is, and also then 'cause, like, there were companies like I think it was one of the large banks in Canada that we spoke to, and they said, look, we have so many supports. But and this guy said to me, and I'm a senior leader in HR, and I don't know what half of them are, and I wouldn't know how to find half of them. And
yeah.
navigating our intranet to try and find a solution to a problem that I have,
That's very
close to
interesting.
impossible.
Yeah, what I also realized was there's a lot of not just information out there, but there's lots of metrics, like people are wearing their wearables but there's just too much information, and
Yeah.
I think simplification is another kind of thing that I'm seeing is it could be
Yeah.
a helpful solution
Very important.
for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Barry. Thanks everyone. So market sizing and any relevant shifts. So again, when you're thinking about an idea, it's very useful for you to understand the size of the market and to put a bit of thought into, how you segment it, how you identify the specific portions of that market that you can realistically capture. Now, I'm guessing you've all heard of, or anyone that has an interest in the whole startup scene has heard of the TAM, the SAM, and the SOM. The TAM, SAM, and SOM. TAM is the total addressable market, which is generally a pretty big number, largely meaningless from a startup perspective. There's the serviceable addressable market, which is a subset of the total addressable market. But again, it's not a market that you'll ever be able to capture. And then there's the serviceable obtainable market, which is what you could hope to capture over time. And
Kieran, I'm
some,
sorry to interrupt, but we just had the black box there on the bottom of the slides. If you wouldn't mind moving it to the side
I
towards the right. Thank you so
I
much.
will indeed, not a problem, Kaylee. So sometimes investors will look for a visual representation of your market segmentation. So it can be a requirement, shall we say, that you put a bit of thought into this. And the market trends, the market dynamics, or the tailwinds that could strengthen your opportunity. And as I said earlier, the regulatory or the technological shifts that are creating a market opening. So the TAM, SAM, and SOM sometimes shown in this kind of format, where you're showing a very big pie of a certain value, a smaller version of that for the servable addressable market, and the serviceable obtainable market then is a smaller slice of that you would hope to perhaps be able to capture over time, over a sort of a 3 to 5 year period. So, just looking at this in very, very simple terms, let's say you're starting a company that sells a particular type of pet food. You could look at the total market for pet food, or the total number of pets in the world, then the market for your particular type of animal. And then if there's a subset of that, say, for example, you're producing a puppy food product, or indeed you might look at that in the context of a particular geographic region. So we're looking at this for, puppies in Ireland, or puppies in Sweden, or wherever, or puppies in a particular city. Or you're starting an e-learning company. It could be, total market for learning, then total market for online learning, and then the market for online learning for something in particular that you have a focus on, which might be ethics and compliance, for example. So again, it can give you some indication of the business potential of your idea. So one of the first things that investors will look at is the market size. And obviously, the bigger your market size, the lower the risk to their investment. And also, a growing market can give confidence as well. So, if you're able to demonstrate or show, or, pull a report that says that this market is growing at, 5%, 10%, 15% compound annual growth rate, CAGR, that can instill confidence. And it gives you a sense of it. And look, in some cases your market might be quite niche, and niche can be a good thing, as Leah said yesterday. If you can pick a niche area and do it extremely well, there is an upside to that. But the market obviously could be too niche, and you'd want to know that too. So let's cast our mind back to when Facebook first came about. So Facebook was an idea by Mark Zuckerberg, and his focus at the time was developing something for the university that he was based. So what do you think the TAM, SAM, and SOM for Facebook might have been at that time? We're not looking at it retrospectively now. We're not looking at it in the rearview mirror, where we know how it has gone and we know what kind of a market presence it has now. Its TAM, SAM, and SOM now would be very different to its TAM, SAM, and SOM back then. Anyone want to have a go? All very shy. Look, for the sake of time, so yeah, so the TAM, all the people in the world. SAM, all the people who can be online at that time, which wasn't obviously as penetrated as it is now. And then the SOM for Zuckerberg at that time was Harvard students. You know, he was at Harvard, student at Harvard, and his focus was servicing and obtaining the customers, the Harvard students who were on campus at that time. Just something very
Sorry, Kieran.
simple. Yep.
Sorry, Kieran. I can't help but I have to jump in here. This is one of my examples on why IPv6 is needed. So the Meta infrastructure is completely IPv6 only. Their infrastructure is so big. He has today 3.4 billion daily customers. They have 6.8 billion customers. So it just gives an idea of where the scaling and these numbers of connectivity is required. So for people to think about how that WhatsApp message gets delivered to your phone, it's using this infrastructure. So yeah, as you said, the scale of it now is just, it's just off the charts. 3.4, just, 3.4 billion. And the original addressing scheme that came out had only 4.2 billion addresses. So just to give you an idea of the scale, like it's just, and they're only one, obviously, of the big players.
Yeah, out of this world. Oh no, yeah. I mean, what has transpired since the early days is just unbelievable for sure. And thanks for sharing that, Ian. So look, there's ways and means of getting market sizing information. I already pointed to a market report there recently. This is something that I would include within a feasibility report, whereby there's a need to articulate a market size and a growth rate from a credible source. And there's lots of companies that sell these reports, but as I said to you the other day, you can also get samples of these reports. And this was just simply pulled from a sample. Gives me the customer experience management market size and forecast that over a few years. Good information to get. So, you got to figure out what makes sense for your startup. The big thing that investors like to see is a bottom-up consideration to the serviceable, obtainable market also. So again, that's another important consideration. So when you're going looking for information, try and get a breakdown of your potential customers. That might be age groups, it might be geographical location, as we mentioned earlier, socioeconomic background, income levels, etc. But look for numbers that make sense for your idea. And there's lots of sources, there's lots of places you can go. Government reports, market reports, official stats, cite your sources if you find them, etc. And make those numbers realistic and justifiable. And so have some way of, estimating what they are. We estimate that X number of people are buying online, and out of this, Y number are buying electronic goods, and Z number, would make enough money to afford our product. So have a justifiable way of determining what that number is, and that it's defendable. Okay. John Bond, do we have you on the call?
You do indeed.
Good man, Sean. You're very welcome.
Thank you, Kieran. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Folks, Sean is our guest speaker for today, for this morning. Sean has a good story to tell. I overlapped with Sean just about a year and a half ago. Sean's based in the Technological University of Dublin, and I'll not steal his thunder, but decided as a member of staff at TU Dublin to embark on his own customer discovery journey for various reasons, and that proved to be very beneficial in terms of his overall project and its strategy and what he achieved. So Sean, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself and tell your own story in your own words, warts and all.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kieran, and thanks everybody for having a listen to this lovely story today. So Dr. Sean Bond is my name. I started out in TU Dublin undergrad, went on to do a PhD, and now I'm very, very deep into a full commercialization fund. So presuming...
Sorry, Sean, there are a few people here who are non-Irish, so just for their benefit, the commercialization fund is funding from Irish Innovation Support Agency, so central government money that university researchers in Ireland can apply for to build out their idea into a market-ready state, and it would be an instrument that's there to support the journey to spin out, to creating a spin out from the university. Sorry, Sean.
It's all good, and I'm assuming, Kieran, that this is largely around customer discovery stage of the projects. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Just your words and all the story. I mean, anything that you have considered in the context of competing technologies, etc., Sean, you can feel free to share, because we have delved into that a wee bit this morning. But look, I leave it over to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my commercialization journey began, well, I suppose as a very young child. I was always into entrepreneurship, but I went on to do a PhD, and towards the end of that PhD, I sort of discovered that there was an opportunity to commercialize the work and the technology that I had developed during that very long time of research and development during a PhD. And the first step, I suppose, was doing a feasibility study. So with Enterprise Ireland, you can apply for a feasibility study. I'm sure Kieran may have touched on this. And we engaged with a consultant. At this point, I was quite new to customer discovery, didn't really have any systems in place, didn't really know what I was doing. So I was kind of letting the consultant take the lead, obviously, as one would do. And we went about the journey of trying to figure out, is the product we're developing. I want to preface the story as well about sort of engaging in these activities, because a lot of people on this call will very likely have a very deep domain experience in something, whether that be in IT, in AI, in food science, in engineering. And I suppose one thing I didn't know at this stage, but I know now very well, is that you're not really trying to go out and figure out if your product or the technology that you've necessarily developed at this current stage is what the market wants. What you're really trying to do is understand if you can find a application for your domain experience and knowledge that you've developed in the market. So you're using this customer discovery phase as sort of a North Star to try to figure out where is your compass and where does your domain experience land in that journey. So we engaged with a consultant. Long story short, the consultant wasn't really doing his job very well at all. He was effectively trying to sell the technology that we had, which is it's counterintuitive to what you should be doing, because what you really should be doing is understanding what the problems are from the customer's side. We have a domain experience. We know that there's problems. We want to figure out how do we blend those two things together. So pretty more early on in the feasibility study, I decided to cancel the contract with the consultant and engage by myself. We had some really, really good calls after that. We had some really good engagements with industry. So the first one, I suppose, without even getting too much into the technology that we're developing, it's largely around structural health monitoring and developing embedded systems for that. So we had an assumption of what the industry wanted. We went to TII initially, and they kind of says, that's fantastic. We don't need that, but we'd be interested in something like this. And we says, okay, that's very interesting because we do still have domain knowledge in this area. Maybe we can sort of repackage and reshape the domain expertise we have into a different offering. So we then continued on with our customer discovery. We talked to ROD, we talked to, loads of different companies. We eventually came across National Highways. And at this stage, we were planning on monitoring structures and doing all sorts of invasive works. And they kind of turned around and says, well, look, we have a huge problem here that, the biggest problem, I suppose, for us is not being able to see the problem, because we need a way to monitor this. And we've got a very particular kind of structure that has this problem. So if you can find a way to do that, then we'd be very much interested in engaging with you. So from that point on, we kind of says, right, well, let's continue to change and manipulate and shape the offering that we have to apply that to the problem that the customer is presenting to us. So throughout this entire journey, we weren't marrying ourselves to any technology. We weren't being stubborn in a sense that we know what's right and the industry has to accept that. We were very open to changing and being wrong. And that's a very, very important lesson to learn, because as long as you allow yourself or the technology to be shaped by what the industry wants, you'll have a better offering because you're not trying to force a technology upon somebody. So with this insight, we went on further, and we managed to gather a significant interest from industry. We gained about 7 letters of support. And what this allowed us to do was to apply for a commercialization fund, which we were ultimately awarded. That fund was, was a very significant fund, largest in the university, probably one of the largest funds that's been raised in Ireland, give or take a couple of $100,000. And now we're at the stage where we're not just stopping that commercial discovery phase or customer discovery phase. We have a product, we're in R&D, we're developing it, we're developing our commercial strategy, but we're still engaging with industry to see how do we shape that to something that they want. Because ultimately, if you have a product or service that you're trying to develop and get funded, that it sort of exists in a superposition of states between what the customer decision has to be made at the end of the journey. So they have a business decision to make. You're trying to offer a technology that influences that. You have to figure out how do you close that gap and how do you close that technology. So far it's been a very exciting, interesting, ups and down journey. And I would imagine it's going to continue that way. But I think the biggest takeaway is being open to being wrong, being open to listening and engaging very, very early on with customer discovery, because what you listen and hear from industry and different partners, that will eventually shape what you plan to develop.
Brilliant, Sean. Thanks a million. I know in one of the conversations that we had, I think it was with National Highways, they flagged another technology, a competing technology that that they had trialed or they were piloting at that time. And one of the things that we're talking about today is just that need to stay abreast of developments within your segment, because you can use that information to shape your own value proposition to either differentiate yourself in a positive way, or ensure that you're wary or knowledgeable around any threats that might be coming down the track.
Yeah, it's also something to be cautious about as well, is because if you, for example, we spoke with National Highways and they brought up a technology that was similar but different in ways to what we're trying to propose. And if we take an aggressive approach and say, no, it's wrong, no, you don't know what you're talking about, this is the way, it's never going to work. But trying to, like, you don't really want to convince them, but you want to show them that your technology is either better or it works into the workflow that they are trying to establish. So in our sector, snapshot technology, one point in time, is becoming very popular because it's a very easy system to deploy. But our value proposition is that if you adopt our technology with your current workflow, which is what you're trying to adopt, you're able to fill in the gaps along the way and have a more powerful technology. So rather than trying to push against the tide, we're kind of going with it and saying, well, that's a good idea in this circumstance, but we can, have better options in other areas. So it's there's a lot of strategy involved about how you go about these conversations with your customers, but being aware of what they're using, being aware of what they're trialing, being aware of where the money is flowing, being aware of where budgets are spent, how the budgets are spent, who's getting funded will allow you to understand where is adoption being, where is the adoption happening, and do you fit in with that? Are you an outlier? Is there a huge amount of competition within this market? Because ultimately competition is good, but it does really drive a lot of work, basically, So it's all things that must be considered, but being aware of them earlier on does give you a good advantage that you can, instead of trying to push against it, work with it,
Brilliant. Thanks, Sean. Does anyone have any questions for Sean?
Yeah, I do, Ian.
Ian, hi.
Hi, Sean. I suppose the thing there that you've kind of given the impression there is that you've adjusted your concept to fit in with the business proposal. But are you still keeping your original idea in the background as your North Star, like that you're heading for, or like have you changed direction because of the business?
Really good question, Ian. And it's something I really want to labor today, is that you should not consider your original idea as what you're proposing. You should consider your domain expertise of what you're shaping. So we initially were coming up with a remediation technology that was going to attach to concrete structures, and we were going to run treatments and remove the problem. And industry didn't like it. It was just sort of like, no, it's not happening. But we had a very, very, very good understanding of the problems, how to detect the problems, how to treat the problems. So that was our domain expertise, and that was our product. And it's two separate things you have to consider, because we shaped our domain expertise to produce a product, and we're still doing that. So we have now a sensor we're developing, but it's what we do with that data that we're starting to shape. So rather than assume what the industry wants, we're talking to industry to ask them what do they want and how do we shape it. So you should really consider, how do you extract from your own domain experience and expertise a product or service that's going to be adopted by industry. So our initial concept has changed dramatically, massively, absolutely night and day. But it's that core understanding of the problem and the technology that we're using to shape that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's very it's a relief as well.
Yeah, one thing
Yeah.
like you'll notice is that like even when you go to pitches and you see, there's a thing with Further, for example, that they do a 2-day course, and like everybody will pitch to investors, and the most, sort of concerning thing you see with a lot of people is that they're pushing ideas that you can clearly see from a pitch that maybe it doesn't make sense, and their markets are getting smaller, and their adoption is smaller, but they're married to that idea because they're so stubborn in what they think the market wants, is that they're sort of, it's a self-destruction because they're not allowing themselves to change that and be open to something different, because ultimately what you assume the market wants is not going to be correct initially, very, very rarely. But if you allow yourself to be shaped and drawn to the market rather than pushing into the market, you'll have a much better impact.
Yeah, excellent. And last question. So, like when you got this interaction with this National Highways, like had you experienced many rejections prior to that? And like, how important were they to the overall? They seem to be the link that have allowed you to really develop.
So you shouldn't consider them as rejections. You should, it's customer discovery. You're not necessarily going into a conversation to have a customer. You're not necessarily going in to say, right, at the end of the call, here's a DocuSign, sign the check for 500 grand a year. Like, you're going into that conversation to understand what do they want. And you're not going to instantly convert them off that call, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to understand, what is the problem? How do you solve the problem? How are they currently solving the problem? How do you shape your domain expertise to solve that problem? You take what you learn from that call, because you may not be correct in your assumptions. You go to the next call. You then do the same thing, and you do this many, 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 many times. We've probably had 3 or 4 dozen calls at this stage with industry, and every single time we go in, we don't really know what we have. We kind of have an idea. Here's what we think. What do you think? Are you adopting something similar? You know, what do you think of our approach? You think it could be changed, and then you take that and move on. And it's an iterative process of getting closer to what is an actual minimum viable product. You know, you use those conversations to basically shape the product, you know?
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Paul. Or Sean, sorry.
Great,
Hi,
Ian.
Sean.
Thank you. Hi, Barry.
I have a question. Great. Thanks a million for talking to us today. It was brilliant to listen to you. It's very you have great energy about and obvious passion for what you do. I was looking at your LinkedIn there. You have quite a significant amount of education behind you, and I was just wondering. At this from the start to where you are now, I asked the same question to I think it was Leah yesterday. How many people did you have around you, and how easy was it to find the right team to kind of drive that forward, and how important is it to have those people around you?
It's a good question again, and it's something that's going to be different in every single case. Some people thrive in a team environment, some people thrive leading the charge. Um, my PhD was a journey of solitude, as most PhDs are. You go through a point where you realize you're the only one pushing this forward. Some people go through PhDs in teams, so it's going to be different for everybody. So when I finished my PhD, while I was engaging with, our TTO, engaging with Kieran, engaging with other people, ultimately I was the person that was pushing this forward. I was writing the applications, I was coming up with the ideas, I was doing all the work. Now that I've raised a fund, I have a team of 5 people and growing. We also have contractors that are working for us that we're outsourcing a lot of work to. But from my own personal anecdotal experience, it's an energy that I have inside me that drives this forward. And I think you've picked up on that it's if I don't keep moving the needle, nothing's going to happen. You know, it's not going to drive itself. So you just got to keep pushing. That's literally it. And, it's when it was Ian was saying earlier on, when you get rejections, you never consider things as objections. You always see the positivity in everything. You always see that every interaction you have is another, step along the journey that allows you to keep pushing forward. Those bring up a good point of when you get to the point of hiring, you should really consider the options you have available to you. And this gets a little bit further down the road, maybe a little bit ahead of what we're talking about today. But the only advice I can give there is they really consider the ability to outsource some of your R&D, because we, for example, were planning on hiring a hardware engineer, found it very, very, very difficult to hire through the public system. We had interview, candidate lists of maybe 2 people after 2 rounds, and we decided, what, we're going to outsource this. We outsourced it to a company in Serbia called Bitgear. After 5 months, we have a working prototype that's ready to be deployed across different trial sites, and we've accelerated our ComFund probably by about 12 months. So I don't know, it's a hard question. I mean, it's up to you really what you see as what you need. Do you need people around you, or can you drive this yourself,
Where I'm at the moment is I'm trying to decide. I'm in a master's digital health. So I'm going into my research year this year. I've gone through like a couple of different customer discovery processes, and I'm kind of happy to drive it forward, but I don't know whether I need to go on and do my PhD, or can I just rely on maybe finding that one person to kind of that understands the tech side of things. I'm looking to go into developing something that monitors monitors stress. Let's say whether I've pivoted from wearables to data analysis or visual analysis tools, just because that's where the market is going, maybe VR. And I'm just wondering, how much of an expert do I have to be in that area to drive it forward, or is it at this point, is it better that I just try and find someone else that's an expert there, and I can push the business forward, I guess?
It really depends on how much you know about the industry that you're in, how much you know about the problem, and also how good are you at selling the problem and doing customer discovery. So you've got a technical side, a commercial side. I'm a little bit of a hybrid in the sense that I've got good ability in both of these areas. So what you're really trying to consider is, do you need a co-founder? Do you need somebody that's going to go on the journey with you? Are you going to share the workload with this person? And somebody that's going to bring to the table a multiplication factor of not just one person. So you have to consider, if I come along and bring on a technical co-founder, are they going to 10x the value of this instead of me just doing it by myself? That's what you really need to consider. If you
Yeah.
think you need that person, try find that person. If you think you can do it yourself, keep continuing on and put systems in place that are going to basically complement you. But it's something only you can answer. And you also have to be a little bit delusional and think that you can do everything and achieve everything, because ultimately you don't need to do anything that you don't want to do, and you can get everything that you want by just doing enough research into how the systems work. You could go out tomorrow with a proposal and raise funding. You could, get a feasibility study from EI if you think that you can do it. That's sort of the power behind of, like, you have to know what you want and what works for you, and have a really good think about, do I work well in a team? Do I will work well with a partner, or can I lead this by myself,
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that, Sean.
Sean, thanks a million. I'm conscious of time here, folks. Great insights, Sean. As always, great journey you're on. Great to hear that you continue to make progress. So look, thank you for giving us your time this morning. I think everyone got a lot out of that.